Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's parent webinar. I think this topic is so important, setting boundaries with love. I think that's one of the biggest challenges for parents, setting those boundaries. I'm Johan van Lille, and with me is Samantha Rotaro. Samantha is the educational psychologist, and she's also part of the Kiro Learning Support project in Kiro. Samantha, I'm going to ask you a few questions and then you'll ask me a few questions and then we'll discuss some things at the end. So let's start off with the first question. Could you explain how understanding a child's developmental stage can influence the way we set and enforce boundaries?
Yes, thanks, Johan. So it's important, obviously, when it comes to boundary setting, the first place is age appropriateness. What is my age appropriate expectation? What kind of boundaries can I set with my child? And how do I communicate those boundaries? It's all related to where is your child in their development. So a preschool learner, grade R learner, cannot necessarily understand reasoning and rationalization. They're going to need very firm, very clear set boundaries. Whereas an older child, grade 3, 4 child, is going to be able to rationalize and understand why you've put the boundaries in place that you have. And as they develop, so will the way that you communicate your boundaries and your expectations. You know, when we get to the teenagers again, you might find that you actually have to revert back for a short period to very direct boundaries because they're going through a time of pruning, they're going through a time of change, and often they need you to kind of revert back again to this is it, there is no movement, there is no change or regulation of boundary. And so that's where the development stage is so important. And I think it's a very good idea for you as parents to maybe just spend a bit of time reading up on where your child is at. You know, when we have our younger ones are very ego orientated, so there's nothing beyond themselves. So when you set a boundary for them, it's very much about the child. And we are not going to throw Legos on the floor. We are going to put the Legos in the box. Very direct, very much about the child. You're not, for instance, going to say to a grade R learner, you're making me very sad when you do that, because for them, they're not ready to understand the emotional impact behavior has. And we wouldn't want to be punitive and make them start feeling anxious when they don't understand what those feelings are and what that rationalization is about. So in that way, development is very, very important. You know, for a grade 5 boy, for example, you're not going to be physical in your discipline or in your boundaries because they're going through a period of change, a period of aggression, a period where they're not going to understand why you reacted that way, and they're going to think it's okay to react that way to other people. So developmental stage really does predict how you communicate your boundary and how you keep your boundaries in place.
So how do boundaries affect a child's emotional development and what are the signs that a boundary is either too strict or too lenient?
Mm. It's always difficult to find that balance, isn't it? Because children differ so much. But for emotional development, boundaries really help with security. They help with the child's attachment, which we know has an impact on future relationships. They need to learn, that's where they learn to trust other people. That's where they learn to negotiate and understand expectation. And that's where they learn social norms and acceptable behaviors when you are putting boundaries in place. So for a little one, throwing food on the floor is not socially acceptable. How are you going? You can't rationalize that. But for their emotional development, you're not going to necessarily say, oh, you doing this and you doing that. You're going to refer to the action. You know, we're always going to refer to the action and say, throwing food on the floor is not appropriate. And in that way, you protect the child's emotional development. You're not showing their behavior as an impact on their personality or how much they are loved or how much they are cared for. You're speaking directly to the behavior. And those things impact how that child develops their trust in others and their engagement in others. So it's very important that we are careful of how we communicate. Then if we are being too lenient or too strict, a balance is difficult and you will find your child reacting emotionally. So a safe, secure, age-appropriate boundary is generally accepted. There's a little bit of fight, but it doesn't go on and on and on. It is not something that is overwhelming. So you don't find that the child consistently melts down or tantrums about the same boundary. For sometimes you feel that the child has to sit in their chair at supper time, not engage until their plate is clean, and that's it. And that may have been a boundary for you as a child, and now you impose that on your child. There's nothing wrong with accepting or wanting the child to adhere to social norms in that way, but it's about how do we set the boundary. Sitting at the table, shouting at that child, sending them away from the table, those things are really punitive measures and they damage that child's emotional development because they really impact the child, the personality of the child, the heart of the child. Whereas if the expectation is set in a request manner, in a role modeled manner, you then develop the behavior and you show the correct behavior that you expect. But emotional development is really, really a sensitive area. And the way that we set boundaries really impacts how that child feels. If they are prone to anxiety, it increases their anxiety terribly. If they are prone to avoiding social contact, it makes that worse. They avoid social contact then at school. So finding the balance is really, really important. Being too lenient means that when you try and put a different boundary in place, they do not adhere at all. They begin to break down and mistrust all the boundaries around them. Then you know, hold on, I'm being too flexible with my boundaries. I'm giving in too much because they don't understand what a boundary is and how important it is. Children that are treated very leniently begin to feel very insecure because they constantly receive negative input from the environment around them. At home, they lie with their feet on the couch. This is a very simple example, but just for us to get an understanding. You may allow them to sit with their feet on the couch. Perfectly acceptable. But then they start jumping on the couch and you kind of don't have the energy and you let them do it. Then they go to school and they jump on the chair and they get reprimanded. Now they don't understand what is incorrect about the behavior. So they become very confused and very insecure. Or they may do it at a friend's house. So although this is a very household dependent example, the idea is that when we are too lenient, we set our child up for being exposed and being reprimanded and receiving negative social input from their environment outside of the home. And that's where we need to be very careful.
So, in what ways can parents adjust boundaries as their child grows and their emotional and cognitive capacities change? So, what can we do as they grow older?
As they grow older, we tend as parents, I do it too. I treated my child when they were 5 this way, and I continue to do it, and I continue to expect the same reaction. And when I used to say, go outside, they went outside. There's no question. Then suddenly comes 10 years old, and I say, go outside, and I get a look. And then I, as a parent, get very frustrated. But it, for them, is completely age appropriate because they've transitioned to an age where they now need to rationalize and understand the boundary. And why is the boundary in place? It's no longer there just because I said it's there. It's also very dependent on parenting styles. You might begin your parenting with a very authoritative style, with a very busy toddler, for example. We are very authoritative and we demand and we try and keep them contained the whole time, running after them, don't do this, don't do that. And then as they grow older, we might find we need to shift our parenting to a more softer and gentle parenting approach where we are willing to rationalize and explain the boundary for them to understand and adhere to it. So as a parent, it's really taxing to know where I need to be, but it's good to have an understanding of growing your boundaries as your child grows, growing the communication style of your boundary as your child grows and develops.
Now, for the one I think most parents are really battling with, because it's really a struggle. What strategies can you recommend for parents whose children consistently test or resist boundaries? I think the frustration for parents that go with that is just it's a huge thing.
It is. And isn't it fascinating that you can have a boundary in your home from little? It can be, we don't ride on the dog. Random example. Um, and then suddenly one day they come home from school and the first thing they want to do is ride on the dog. It's amazing how a boundary that you could put in place and it's been fine, and suddenly they want to resist it and they want to fight you. Wake up in the morning, always got up fine, suddenly no longer. Now they question everything. It has a lot to do with development and where are they at. And when that happens, we need to look at ourselves as parents and go, okay, my strategy is not working. How can I change and adapt the way I communicate the boundaries? Because at the end of the day, the resistance comes from a space of uncertainty. It comes from a space of, I want autonomy over my life, but a preteen and a teen, they don't understand that they want autonomy over their lives. They don't understand that that's what's happening. But us as the adults need to go, you know what? My child is now 8, 9, and they're starting to want autonomy. They're starting to want control over little bits of their lives. And that's where we're going to start adapting our style to give and take. Choosing my battles. First of all, decide what is your boundary that you really feel strongly about, and then have those family meetings, have a sit down, discuss it, put it up visually. Really openly communicate your expectation, the reason behind your expectation, and then the consequence. So, although we don't want to always discipline with punitive measures, if we do it, like we said, setting boundaries with love, if we do it where we are listening to our child's needs, they are listening to ours and our needs, and we are rationalizing the boundaries and agreeing on the consequence, you are providing them autonomy and you're giving them the power to understand why. Remembering that our children are growing up in a very different age. When we wanted to know what a veterinarian does all day, we would ask our teacher. We would go to get a book out the library. We would go and ask mom or dad. They don't do that. They Google. They don't need us for information anymore. And we need to respect that. We need to understand that, excuse my child, he needs me for information, he says.
Mm.
The point is, we have to understand the age that they are living in, and that information is the way that they live. If they run into a trouble on a video game, they quickly YouTube the cheat code. They quickly Google what to do next. And now they cannot Google, why is mom wanting me to make my bed every morning? They can't Google that. They don't know. They need that information because that is the way they are being brought up nowadays. That is their life. That's the space that they're in. And as parents, we're going to consistently get resistance if we are not prepared to sit down, discuss when our children are age appropriately ready to rationalize. When it is the little toddler or the little grade 1 that's fighting your boundaries, same process. You're not going to rationalize, but you're going to give them reason why the boundary's there and autonomy. So the boundary is put your clothes in the wash basket. The autonomy comes from you can do it after you unpack your lunchbox or before you unpack your lunchbox, but the washing goes in the laundry.
And that's
It's a
giving
mouthful.
them that choice. And I think that is giving
Exactly.
them a choice. And also, when you talk about these things, I think it's very important, as I always say, you connect before you correct, to make sure that your connection is in place, and with the timing and all of that is all important when you
Mm.
talk to your children. But now, how should parents manage their own emotions when setting boundaries to ensure the process is perceived as loving and not punitive in that moment in time?
Walk away. Take a breath. It sounds
And
crazy,
it's
but yeah.
and it's normal child development. They all go
Yes,
through it. You're not the only
they do.
parent who's going through it. They all go through this.
They all go through it. And I have this mantra that I sing. What's the song? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, once a quarter fish alive. I sing that all morning long in my head in my house because really it's the only way that I refocus myself consistently. Because when all you've said is just go brush your teeth and they're still jumping on the bed in their underpants, it's really, really difficult to keep it together and be the grown up in the situation. You want to shout and scream and throw your toys out the cot and tell them how late you're going to be. And so I understand that. I think every parent understands that desperation. But we've got to find ways to keep ourselves in check. I have really gone to desperate measures. I even had a reminder on my phone once that used to go off at 5:45 every morning, and it used to say, be the role model, be what you want to see. To remind myself to just keep it together because I cannot expect them to keep it together if I'm not going to keep it together. So it's important to understand your own emotion in this situation. We all have trauma. We all have a story. We all have something. And often it's that lack of control that sends you as the parent into a spiral. And it's important that you need to understand, where does it come from? It's not coming from that young child in front of you that's pushing your buttons. There's something inside of you as the parent that is allowing those buttons to be pushed. They don't purposely push our buttons. Believe it or not, they are not purposely jumping in their underpants on the bed until 7 o'clock in the morning. They're not. But it feels like that sometimes. It really does. Johan, I'm sure you can agree. Sometimes it feels like they're doing it on purpose to drive us nuts. But that is where we as the parent need to do some reflection and understand, what are my triggers and what am I going to do? Am I going to go hide in the bathroom and count to 10? Am I going to have a mantra in my head? What am I going to do to make sure that I connect in the situation, to understand what my child needs to move forward? So be comfortable with yourselves first and your own emotion. Yeah.
So now you need to ask me some questions.
Yes. Okay. Before we start with your section, Johan, do you ever feel out of control as a parent, like you're going to throw something?
Absolutely.
What do you
And I
do?
mean, we are trained to be calm to do it, and we are trained to manage it. But when it comes to your own children, it's very, very difficult. I, my is to choose the timing. I try to model being calm, not to let them to go into a power struggle. I would rather wait for an appropriate time to address it. I won't address it in that moment in time. I will choose an appropriate time for that, and I sit down and then connect before I correct,
Yeah.
and explain
Mm.
exactly what went wrong, why was it wrong, how did they, because we sometimes just assume that they know,
Exactly.
um, what the boundaries
Mm.
are. And it was
Yeah.
never explained to them, and the boundaries keep on changing. So that's when
Exactly.
they get unsure and they really
Mm.
start insisting it.
So, talking about communication, how can parents best communicate the reasons behind these rules and boundaries to their children to foster an understanding and respect?
See, I think the most important part is to communicate the reasons.
Mm.
Sometimes we just make rules and set boundaries, but we never discuss it with them. I know it's an age appropriate thing, so you will not discuss it with a 2-year-old, but you're going to explain it to a 2-year-old, even if they don't grasp all of it. So you should engage in open discussions that are age appropriate. And people, you're not negotiating those discussions, but you should really talk about it and give reasons. So, for instance, for a younger child, simple explanations like we hold hands while crossing the road because it keeps us safe from cars. Help them to understand safety. So we should take time to explain it to them. For older children, remember your teenagers, the prefrontal cortex, this part of the brain is still developing, where all your executive functions are. So we keep on forgetting that that's the stage where it is developing. So things like consequences is not something that comes naturally for them because that's an executive function, cause and effect. So it's still developing. So to explain the consequences, you really create the wiring in that part of the brain. So you need to explain the consequences of not following the rules, like the importance of homework in learning new things, that kind of thing. So
Mm,
you assume that they will know it, but not at that stage because they reboot in that stage. So a
exactly.
lot is happening here and a lot of pruning in the connections. And we should always keep that in mind that we need to start from scratch again with your teenager, communicating why the rules are there, why are the boundaries there, and always ensure that the explanation is clear, that you communicate well, and that the child has a chance to ask questions. You can ask to give them a chance to ask questions, but your body language is telling them keep quiet, don't ask questions. I don't have time for it. So you need to be very neutral, calm when you do it. And this dialogue, if it's open and it really helps build understanding and respect for the rules set. So this is not where you are your child's friend. You do it in a way as the parent-child relationship kind of expects from you in that situation. But explaining the rule in simple language is really, really important. And then also the consequences. It might
Mm,
not be, but not punitive consequences. The consequences if you do not follow that rule. And if you can make the consequences positive and negative, that kind of thing, then they really understand what it's all about. And then the boundary starts making sense to them. If the boundary is not making sense to them, they're going to resist it all the time. And if the boundary is not age appropriate, so if you can't explain it to your child, then you know it's not age
it's not age
appropriate.
appropriate. Mm.
Mm.
That's a very good point, and the communication is so important. When you communicate and you discuss it with the child, you're actually validating them as a person, which they really, really need at this in this day and age. So, could you discuss the importance of consistency in boundary setting and how it contributes to the child feeling secure?
I think when you have a lot of resistance, most of the
Mm,
time, resistance from the child, and I start talking to parents, most of the time parents are busy, and apply consistency in your household, I think is one of the biggest challenges because
mm,
you have to work late, your whole schedule
yeah,
changes. So consistency is really, and I think consistency even for single parents are even more of a challenge because you have so many things that you need to juggle and to keep together. So I think we need to understand what is consistency before we actually talk about the rest. And consistency in boundary setting is really crucial for child development. And it refers to the application of a stable, predictable set of rules and expectations that will guide a child's behavior. And remember, behavior, as I always say, is the purest form of communication from a
mm,
child. That's the way that the child is telling us where they are, and it tells us a lot about what they do and why they do it. So it's really important to help them to understand, that this in the process of consistency. So consistency is all about creating predictable environments as far as you can. So consistency is in boundaries and rules. So you can't have a different rule for a different day. Yes, we sometimes have days where But then we discuss it and say, today is not a normal day, so we're not going to apply the rules, but you have to discuss it. You can't just assume they will know it. So because children function just so much better and they are more easier to handle in predictable environments. So when children know what to expect in terms of responses and consequences to their actions, it reduces uncertainty and anxiety. And this predictability really helps children feel more secure and grounded. And then also, what is important, consistent boundaries help children develop trust in their caregivers. If there's no consistency, then children really battle with their attachment styles
Mm,
and trust becomes an issue. So when rules are applied reliably, children learn that their caregivers are dependable. We sometimes think if we are very flexible, that's love, but it's the other way around.
mm,
If it's dependable and they know what is coming, that's how you demonstrate love to your child and how you show them that you love them. So it's essential for building those secure attachments when your behavior and what you do as a parent is really dependable and predictable, and they know where they stand with you, because that helps a lot with those secure attachments. And then also make a point of teaching self regulation to your children. Remember, uh, self regulation is something that you learn over time, you develop it over time. So, most children, I mean, all children need to develop this. It's not something that they just have one day, takes time. So, to help them and show them how you self regulate yourself. And then again, maybe the self regulation comes from not understanding the boundary. So it's important then for caregivers to really explain it to them and explain the behavior accordingly. And then also help them with decision making skills, because when boundaries are clear and consistent, children can make decisions more confidently, because they know the boundaries, they know they're clear, and they learn anticipate outcomes based on their actions, which supports their ability to make choices and understand the consequences of their decisions. And then when you consistency in your behavior really help with boundary setting, and it really decrease those where they really like to challenge your
mm.
boundaries. So because if you have inconsistent boundaries, it can really lead to confusion and frustration for children, and then often resulting in behavior outbursts and tantrums and all those kind of things. And then also emotional stability. When there's a consistency in the household, the children really feel more emotionally stable. So consistency in boundary setting is crucial as it provides a predictable environment, which is essential for your child's emotional security. And when boundaries are consistently maintained, as far as you can with your busy life, children know what to expect and understand and what is expected from them. And we need to tell them what we expect from them, and
Mm.
then reducing confusion and anxiety. So, for example, if bedtime is consistently at 8 p.m., the child kind of get used to this routine, which aids in better sleep habits and overall emotional well-being. But inconsistent boundaries, conversely, can lead to uncertainty and might encourage testing limits frequently as children try to find out where the boundary truly lie. And they will always try to find that out. And the older they become, the more they will try and find. Remember, teenagers are programmed to test the boundaries because of the change in this part of the brain.
Yeah.
So you need to be very, very consistent with them and really talk and discuss it with them, and develop those executive functions.
Yeah, they're so almost anxious about their own changes and developments that they really need you to step up and keep the boundaries in place. While you were
Mm,
talking, I was thinking of two other reasons why consistency is so important. And for teenagers, your consistency as a parent really helps them in peer relationships because they can count on you when they need to get themselves out of difficult peer environments. They can say, well, I can't be on my phone from 10 o'clock to, and they can come home and say, please can I go on my phone at 10 o'clock? And they are hoping and praying that you're going to be consistent with your boundary and not allow it, but they'll never say it to you. But that is just another way where consistency really does help our children tremendously.
Yeah,
And
and also
then with
consistency between the two parents to have
yes,
that consistency between the two parents, even if you don't stay in the same house, try and be as
exactly.
consistent as
Yes.
possible if the children go between the two parents.
Yeah. And consistency doesn't mean it's not going to be questioned. We have a rule in our house, no gaming in the week.
Mm,
But if I stop for fish and chips instead of cooking supper, then the routine is a little bit out. Then they're going to ask me, can they game? And as
mm,
easy as it would be for me to say, yes, go for it 10 minutes, if I do that, tomorrow they're going to ask me again, regardless of whether I change the routine or not. And then it
mm,
becomes a battle of wills in the home, which could
mm,
have been avoided had I just remained consistent in the boundary that they know and trust. So many times, consistency can avoid those clashes and those turmoils in the house because you give a little and they're going to want to take the whole
mm.
leg, not because it's good for them, not because they want it, but because they are testing. They're making sure my home and my environment is secure. So, Johan, what advice do you have for parents on balancing discipline with affection when enforcing boundaries?
I think we should think differently about boundaries. People
Mhm,
most of the time think about boundaries as what children should not do or what they
mhm,
can't do.
mhm,
Boundaries should be positive and it should be based on what you want them to do. So not jumping on this is a boundary, but you can
mhm.
I tell them where they can bounce.
Yeah.
We do not eat on the couch. The boundary is that we eat at the table. So boundaries should be positive. It
Mhm,
should tell them what you want them to do and
mhm,
not what you want them to stop. So, and also it should be enforced with empathy and love. And it's important to then also use positive reinforcement when they follow the boundary because you need to give them recognition for it. So, also, when a child needs to be disciplined for not doing homework, it's very beneficial to first express the understanding of their feelings. I know you'd rather play than do homework, followed by the reinforcement of the rule. But homework helps you to learn and grow, which is why it's important to do it before you play. So you tell them exactly why, so that they understand, and always follow up with affection afterwards to reassure them of your love, such
mhm,
as a hug or a positive note, making sure that they understand that while their actions might be disappointing, your love for them is unconditional.
mhm,
And we take for granted that children will understand that your love is unconditional.
mhm.
They should experience that.
Yeah, we've got to show that. It's those things where those environment times where it's in the moment and you're angry in the moment, remembering that your words need to be about the action and not the child, and still being willing to give that hug or snuggle or quick kiss when you drop them off at school and not leave them with that feeling of abandonment, really, when you withhold affection when you normally would give it. You know? So, how significant is the role of parent modeling in teaching children about boundaries?
Yeah, this is an important one because the role of parent modeling in teaching children about boundaries cannot be overstated. Because the big reason is that children often learn by observing and imitating adults. So that's what they see is what they're going to do. Therefore, when parents consistently respect their own set of rules and boundaries, children are more likely to emulate this behavior. So, for example, if a parent demonstrates punctuality by always leaving for school or work on time, children absorb the importance of time management and are
Mm,
likely to follow suit. They imitate what they see. So, demonstrating respectful communication and adhering to personal boundaries also teaches children to respect others' limits. So it's important for us to imitate that, so to show them so that they can imitate the right behavior.
And could you elaborate on the use of praise and rewards as tools for reinforcing desired behaviors within set boundary?
It's that thing of trying to catch them doing things right
Yeah.
and rather catch them doing things wrong. So,
Mm,
praise and rewards are effective tools for really reinforcing desired behavior. Tell them what they do right and
mm,
reinforce that. Acknowledge that, because that helps a lot with the boundaries and for them to respect the boundary. Because the positive feedback really motivate further compliance and initiative. So, for example, praising a child for completing chores without being reminded can really encourage them to continue this behavior, rather than punish them for not doing it. So that's a fine balance. And rewards do not always have to be material. They can also be in the form of extra playtime, a favorite story, special outing, extra time with you. These rewards and praises should be directly linked to the specific behavior to strengthen the connection between the action and the positive reinforcement.
mm.
So I want us to discuss quickly, Sam, how can parents effectively listen to and understand their children's feelings to better tailor boundaries to their needs and growth. So for me, it's like that. If like it all comes down to effective listening, because it involves giving undivided attention and making and asking open-ended questions and acknowledging their feelings. I think that is so important when it comes to boundaries, that we will acknowledge our children's feelings, because not all boundaries are nice. Some of them are just
No.
to keep you safe. Sometimes you
Yeah.
have to stay in house. It's not nice to stay in the house. So some of them are like that. So to listen to those feelings, not to
Mm.
dismiss it, but to listen and to
Listen,
with empathy and to talk about it.
you know what I really, really love? A lovely way to do it with younger children is to draw a picture together as a family. So you sit together, big A3 page, and you draw the various boundaries in the home. You draw sitting at the table for dinner, you draw unpacking the dishwasher, you draw reading in bed before bedtime, and then you discuss the pictures and you allow them to use colors. When mommy says we have to sit and eat at the table, how do you feel? Do you feel red? Do you feel blue? Do you feel green? To give them the tools to express it to you, and then you will better understand why they react the way they do. This is by no means saying don't put the boundary in place. This is just about having your child able to express how they feel about the boundary. It's not going to make it go away, but being validated as a person with my own feelings and giving them a little bit of autonomy really goes a long way when dealing with today's children, because they are so much more independent in different ways than what we used to be at these ages. And as they get older, some teenagers, because of the pruning and the development of that prefrontal cortex, they have no filter. They
Mm.
struggle to speak respectfully. And when you sit down to have these conversations as a parent, remembering that the development of the child, remembering where they're at, and not expecting filter. There's a very big difference between respect and communicating without filter. You might find that a teenager will say, it irritates the heck out of me. It's not disrespectful, they're not swearing at you, but that is how they are able to communicate and share that frustration. So it's tricky as a parent, very, very tricky. You were speaking earlier about praise and reward, and reward systems differ so much. But I was wondering how you feel about reward systems in the home, because so many people say, oh, the old school star chart doesn't work, it doesn't help anything. And there's so much different arguments about what kind of praise can I use, Johan. So what would you say to parents? I mean, star charts for some children just don't cut it anymore.
Yeah, I just think positive feedback, giving
Mm,
them quality time when they do right and connect with them. That's still the best. Children wants attention, if it's
yes.
negative or positive. So
Mm,
give them positive attention when they do something right,
yeah.
when they respect a boundary. For me, that is still the biggest reward.
Mm,
Do not give them money. Do not give
no.
them those kind of things because that's not part of it. Give them undivided attention when you talk to them, when you praise them. I'm not a
Mm,
big I don't like these charts and all of that because it only works for a few days and
yeah.
then the novelty is gone and then they kind of doesn't work anymore. So Sam, let's talk a bit about practical examples of setting boundaries with love. For me, one of the biggest things which I've got my pet hate is time out. Because
Uh,
from a young age, everybody use time out as a punitive, as a punishment. But for me, time out is for the child to self-regulate, to regroup, to get themselves together. So I think one of the things is that we should stop using time out for punishment. We should use
mm,
time out for children to get themselves together, to self regulate, and give them tips when there's time out to do that. For me, that is a very practical one. And then to have a routine at home,
mm.
and stick to your routine as far as you can. That makes them safe. It helps with boundaries and it helps to set those boundaries.
Yes, our younger children, grade 1 and 2, even grade R's, they want you to read that same book every single night. And it gets so annoying because you've got to read the same story every single night. But that is their crave for routine. That is their crave for structure and keeping the boundaries and things in place. Um, it's so important when you think practically about, oh, you mentioned something just now that I wanted to add to. But when we talk about the children and setting those boundaries, as a parent, it becomes really difficult for the routine. But something that you can always count on is a bedtime routine that you can do whether you're camping or whether you're holidaying or whether whether in your family you read for 5 minutes together and then they spend time on their own. That routine is something that you can always keep going. So it's helpful to have that in place. And it helps with sleep habits, like you mentioned earlier. The other thing is when you spend time together. So, like you say, with time out, we used to have, or we still do, have quiet time. When the children are in each other's faces and things are getting out of hand, then it's just quiet time. So, even though we're using the same principle as time out, we're not using it as a punitive measure. My children understand that quiet time means we all need to breathe, regroup, self regulate. They have their own ways of self regulating, and that is with your older children, they understand that. And don't underestimate our foundation phase children. They understand self regulation. They will withdraw themselves when they need to go self regulate and praise that. Praise that by saying to them, I saw that you were getting overwhelmed, or I saw that your body felt busy, and I'm so proud of you that you took the time to take some time out for yourself. Because in that way, you are modeling and you're verbalizing to them what it means. So they just do it because they need it. But by you coming and explaining to them what it meant, that it's for them to calm down, that they could collect themselves, that gives them that autonomy and that power to know, oh, what I did has a reason. I must do it again. But we need to teach. We need to use those opportunities for teaching.
So, Sam, we are at the end of the session. Let's end
Oh,
off
so
with a
quick.
few last thoughts from both sides. But a last few thoughts from my side is that you should regularly assess and discuss boundaries to ensure they remain appropriate. I think that's so important, appropriate for the child's age and development. You should revisit those boundaries often.
Mm,
And you can do this really, as you said earlier, during a family meeting or a one-on-one discussion. And then also take the child's feedback into consideration because if the boundary is too rigid or too lenient, it is something that you should address.
mm. From my side, I think it's important, like you said, the communication and then share parenting. So, whoever fulfills the role of parenting or even just guardianship in some way for your child, it's important that you're all on the same page, because that develops that consistency and security for the child. Because we want to develop trust and healthy attachment with caregivers so that they grow up to be healthy adults. So always when you doubt yourself, sit down and communicate, talk it through, have a mantra to keep yourself calm, and just show love. You can't go wrong by repeating to your child over and over again, I love you, you're a superstar, hand out those hugs, and everything will be fine.
And that's all for tonight. Thanks for tuning in. It was wonderful having you joining us. Our talk was all about setting boundaries with love. And from me, Johan and Sam, thank you very much for everyone and have a
Thank
wonderful
you.
evening and see you next time.
Yeah. Bye bye.